Hello, everyone. Today, I am very pleased to be sharing a conversation with my mentor, friend, and co-founder of mBraining, Marvin Oka. If you came across this video because you follow my Recovery After Stroke podcast, you should know that this discussion goes beyond the usual content on my channel. Amongst other things, you'll hear how mBraining played a significant role in my own story of healing and growth. For my mBraining audience, coaches, trainers, and facilitators, this is an opportunity to deepen your understanding of how aligning heart, head, and gut intelligence fosters genuine consciousness evolution. We're diving into some fascinating topics about how mBraining creates second-order change and emergent outcomes. Whether you're a coach, trainer, or someone passionate about unlocking human potential, this discussion has so much to offer. So, what did we speak about? Well, Marvin and I discussed the role of second order change and why traditional approaches often fall short. We also explored how mBraining helps align the head, heart, and gut to create real transformation. We also touched on the deeper philosophy behind mBraining, its generative learning framework, and why reconnecting to your essence is so powerful. Plus, we explored how first order and second order changes work together, practical tips for coaching, and the flexibility of using different starting sequences in your sessions based on your client's unique needs. Also, this year, 2025, Marvin will be launching the Professional Change Agents Network, an initiative offering professional development programs and resources for leaders, coaches, facilitators, and anyone in the change-making space. If that sounds like something you'd like to learn more about, head over to behavioralmodeling.com and get on the mailing list. You'll be the first to know about any updates. Hello, Marvin.
Hey, Bill. It's great to be with you again.
Thank you for being with me. I really appreciate it. I wanted to pick up from some of the conversations that you and I have had before about mBraining, amongst other things. And when we last spoke, I made some notes about some things that got me curious that um, that I have probably investigated peripherally myself, just on this or on the surface, actually, kind of just using mBraining in the coaching that I do with stroke survivors. And what I noticed often is that my coaching facilitates second order change and emergent outcomes. So what I notice is when I'm coaching somebody and they have an issue that we're discussing that they need some support with, we start off with an issue, and then that issue often very quickly in the coaching session dissipates or transforms or goes away, and then something else emerges, which seems to, and at the same time, that creates clarity for that other person about what, in fact, their outcome really is over and above what they thought their outcome was when we started. And it got me thinking about how does mBraining facilitate that? I know that's not my real question, but like it got me thinking about how does mBraining facilitate that second order change and these emergent outcomes that occur and these actual different challenges. How does it facilitate that happening is kind of my thinking about it. And then, like, from your perspective, when you're developing the model and the modality, do you know that mBraining is going to facilitate second order change? Do you know that we're going to see emergent outcomes? Do you stumble across that and then go, Oh, how did we get here? Can you give me some insight into what happens there? Because I feel like that even though I know that that's what mBraining does, it still catches me off guard in a really nice, surprising way. Do you know where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. All right, let's see if I can try and approach this. There's several different angles to try and answer your question here. Um, Maybe to start with somewhere in the middle, as you said, did did um, did I know at the start that this was going to actually happen? Well, yes and no. Um, yes, because that's kind of the work that I do with in my work in generative learning about how to take a look at in when you're talking about second order change applied to an individual. A common piece of language that's out there is what's called vertical change, which is an evolution of consciousness in the person. And so I knew that that was going to happen. Now, when were first pulling together mBraining and all of the mBIT techniques, at first it was just trying to synthesize all those science data and then turn it into some kind of practical method and methodology. And as you know, as we talk about in the certification training, that we deliberately chose the word multiple brain integration techniques. And each of those was deliberate. Each of those pieces of language was deliberate. And specifically techniques to keep us honest. We didn't just want to go off in the land of just conceptual frameworks. It had to be practical, tangible techniques people could do. And so at first, though, we just had to piece it together. At first, it was just like, okay, how do we integrate this into some sort of cohesive, coherent methodology? Then, when it came down to the techniques, and it came down to actually after the techniques, it came down to working with someone. At that point, it was like, oh, yeah, of course, they're not going to know when we ask them, what's your outcome? What do you want? Or what brings you to this particular session? We know that the problem state that they're in is doesn't have the answer, and we know that it's going to emerge. So at the start, I wasn't thinking about it, but by the time we actually started to code how to facilitate an actual client, yeah, it was already embedded in my thinking as to how this was going to work.
Okay. Just before you go further, the problem state that they're in isn't going to have the answer.
No,
Is that because you can't solve a problem from the same state that you are in that created the problem?
correct, correct.
Okay.
I can articulate it in a range from a range of different angles. So if, as you know, within standard NLP, for instance, we talk about state, behaviors, and results, and that people's behaviors are both empowered as well as limited by whatever particular mental, emotional state that they're in. And they're not going to be able to access different behaviors until they can change a state conducive to those behaviors. So you know that if someone is in a problem state, well, what behaviors come with it? All the things that produce the problem that they're trying to deal with. If they were in a solution state, they would do solution behaviors. But that's not why they come to you, right? They came to you because they're in the problem state and they can't get out of the particular problem state. Now, the one of the key things when we're starting to put together the mBraining methodology is I said to Grant at the time, let's not create another behavioral tech. We don't need another behavioral technology out there. What we need is, and this has always been my particular angle in all the work that I do, which is it needs to be some form of second order, or in this case, vertical change, where we can elevate the wisdom of decision making in society. And that's going to require a raising of consciousness. So we need to build in how does this, whatever we're going to produce, how does it help evolve consciousness in humans? And so we know that the level of consciousness that someone comes to us in a problem state, as you rightfully quoted, relating it back to Einstein's quote, the consciousness that they're coming in that produces the problem is not the consciousness where the real transformation can occur. And so you can even hear it with your clients when they come in and state what they want. Usually what they want is just simply the opposite of the problem they have. Right? I'm struggling with this, and I just basically what they're saying is I don't want to struggle. Right? I want to get my outcome without struggling. Or they're saying I'm stressed out, and basically what I want is not the stress. Now that's not very generative. Right? That's simply remedial at that point. So why would we produce a methodology that's pretty remedial? It's kind of like pointless. It's not going to help the world nor them evolve to become better human beings. So we now have to look at what has to happen so that consciousness evolves. With that, it starts from the very beginning. As soon as the client comes in and says, I want X, unlike, say, a traditional NLP approach that says know your outcome as rule number one, and we have well-formless conditions for outcome, and that's really appropriate when the level of consciousness is not the problem, right? When it's just straight behavioral issue. It's just like, how do I actually get from here, present state to desired state? And, okay, great. We can go for know your outcome. But that wasn't the context for mBraining. The context was an evolution of consciousness. And so now it became great. When I ask a client at the start, what can I help you with? I actually don't pay a lot of attention to the actual content of what they're saying, because I know this is going to change as soon as we start. However, that is not to discount it totally, because in the context of evolving consciousness and the person's, for lack of a better term, essence of being, why is there a particular issue? Why is that particular issue they've come to you with? Why is that a problem for them? Why is there a mental, emotional, or even an ontological charge on it? What's the issue? Because the problem has something to do in resonance with their essence. But they're not at a state of consciousness to access that essential way of being, where addressing that, whatever the situation, would just be a natural expression of essence. So you don't solve the problem. You get them reconnected back to their essential way of being, a more authentic way of expression, and then they'll just do what they have to do in that particular situation.
So when
Right?
they turn up to coaching, what they're doing is they're expressing themselves in a way that is not in line with their essence,
Yes,
with their true way of being.
correct. And usually, I mean, it has something to do with it, but it's gone slightly off because they've been now caught up in their stories and their maps. They're now caught up in their internal representations of what's going on. They're caught up in their internal representations of their own identity. They're caught up in their narratives and stories about things. And so one of the things, you asked as part of your question is how does mBraining or mBIT actually help them emerge these new outcomes? Well, the very first step, as you know, is, okay, let's go into autonomic coherence. That instantly is going to produce a different mental, emotional state of being than the problem state. Instantly, they're going to have more access to be able to emerge a better outcome that's more authentic. And this is now it doesn't necessarily do that. You have to use your language to do that. And you have to create an entrainment space as the coach so that they can get there as well. Right? But when all of that's in play, then yes, very, very quickly, inside of the first several minutes, yeah, they'll start thinking differently about what that whole issue is. But yeah, as an mBIT coach, the last thing you want to do is problem solve.
Well, I know that makes sense when you hear it from you, but it's like it's dealing. What we're doing is dealing with the cause, not the symptom. Are they? Is that what's happening? Do clients turn up expressing the symptom?
Yes, they express a symptom. Correct. And what they're expressing a symptom of is a disconnect with their essential self. They're caught up in, for lack of better terms, if you were to denominalize the word ego, they're caught up in their identifications of who they think they are and all their problems. And they're not meta to their own stories and their own internal representation. And that's part of it. But you can't just dissociate them from their internal reps. That's just behavioral. But you do have to help them disidentify with their internal representations and then reconnect back to something that is not a representation, but it is experiential. And they start to now experience themselves expressing themselves.
Okay. So something to do here is sort of triggering me to say something like it's got something to do with doing instead of being. It sounds like
Mm.
one of them is just a doing behavior, it's a doing thing. And the other one, where we want to facilitate people attend or access, is their being, their way of being rather than way of doing.
Okay, how deep you want to get, Bill?
Well, I want to get deep. These are the things that trouble me, Marvin.
Okay, good. Okay. Here again, we need to get meta to our use of language, our own mapping of
Mhm.
things, right? And I know you're a big fan of looking at various forms of wellness languaging and things of that nature. And so when we look at the words being and doing, it's because of the way that the personal development market likes to frame certain kinds of things. We see them as uh, of a different, for lack of better language, different categories. Right? Technically, what's called logical types. They're a different type of description. And then every now and then you'll find someone who will express the idea of being is doing and doing is being. And so now how do we resolve this language pattern compared to being versus doing? Right? And we started finding, well, okay, there's always a third force. There's always a thesis, antithesis, and there's a synthesis. There's a yin and a yang and a Tao. There's always going to be a trialectic in here, affirming, denying, reconciling. So we could look at this and say, yeah, there is a difference between being and doing at one level of consciousness. A client will come to you and they say, I want to fix this or I want to get rid of this problem. And it will be doing. They're going to ask, what do I do? Right? What can I do about this? And someone very cluey will help them, a good coach will help them get into more states of being. However, how does being express itself? It expresses itself through doing. And sometimes by altering what you're doing will also change ways you can be. Right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to alter our states by changing what we're doing or changing our physiology or things of that nature. So at a different order of thinking or a different order of consciousness, being and doing become the same thing. You can't be without doing. And whatever you're doing is how you're being. Right? So it kind of transcends the being versus doing dichotomy, false dichotomy. All right. So when a client comes to you, yes, usually at the first level with the problem state, they're focused on help me do stuff differently so I don't have this problem anymore. A good consciousness coach will then help them access states of being, but then from that state of, for lack of better terms, we don't have real language for this. I'll pull on a range of different expressions. An essential self, an essential way of being, or an authentic way of being. Then will come a natural expression, a natural behavioral doing expression. And so this is why when your multiple brains are integrated, then the problem often goes away, and all that's left, if there's a situation they still have to deal with, there's no problem with that situation. You just express yourself, right? You're totally aligned. Do what your heart is important to your heart. Do what is a creative expression of your way of being, and just respond. No problem. There's no problem. You still go on. It's like the old phrase, the old Zen quote, right, or Zen saying of, before enlightenment, chopping wood and carrying water. After enlightenment, chopping wood and carrying water. You still got to go do it. It's just that there's no problem anymore. You're just being in the world.
is this might sound like a silly question, and maybe there's an obvious answer. Is 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 it the fact that clients have turned up to coaching with accessing only one intelligence, perhaps, or not the other intelligences, that kind of causes that symptom? And then, as a result of that, getting them to re engage the other intelligences, is that kind of what helps to support the shifting of the problem from being a problem to now it's not a problem?
Depends. Um, if you're coming at things from a purely an mBIT or mBraining perspective, a lens, then yes, the five neural integrative constraints will be your filter, right? That's what you're going to be looking for. However, if you go outside of the mBraining mBIT methodology, then you'll see that, yeah, you could also just have a range of other problems. For instance, just take the head brain, for instance. Well, we could have something as straightforward as, okay, you've got very flawed conflicting beliefs, right? You're running uh, um overgeneralized, deleted, distorted narratives going on. And if you got that story running in your head, no wonder the rest of your brains are all confused. Yeah, you're working to maps that don't match the territory. So right off the bat, this is where something as basic, for those that know NLP, as basic as a meta model could really help, right? There's other times when you might find someone who, as you would know, that they're so disconnected from their body that it has nothing to do with their brains right now. They're just disconnected from their body. They're just not communicating with themselves at any sensorial level. So it could be a range of other things, and it could very well be that their gut health is so bad that they got really terrible communication coming out of the gut. Right? The gut's in stress, and so you're not going to get any intelligence. It's not a question of alignment of the brains at this point. Let's just get your gut brain healthy to begin with before we can do anything, right? So it could be a range of different things to look at. So come back to your question, if from a straight mBIT perspective or mBraining perspective, it could be just the neural integrative constraints that you've checked for, but hopefully we've got more and bigger models than just the mBraining methodology alone.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the opening part of my question, which was
Hmm.
about the emergent outcomes and second order change, I've
Hmm.
um, how do I know when I've facilitated that? Like, I, with emergent outcomes, I think it's a little more obvious. I think you kind of see it in uh, the way the coaching session sort of goes, where it goes, which direction, and the language, etc. But second order change, is it going to be obvious to me in a coaching session, or is it something that I'm going to see perhaps in the maybe a future session or down the road with the person's um, overall way and state and the way that they're handling themselves?
Okay, this is a really important question because you're having to track to some kind of evidence procedure to know if you're on track with your work or not. So like I said, depends how deep and big you want to get on this. So knowing you, let's kind of explore a few things here. So first, as I said just previously, that you need other models, maps, language to be able to answer the kinds of questions you're asking and to be able to wield mBraining more effectively. You can't just stick to the mBraining world by and of itself, right? You'll get good within that world. You can get really good within that world, but if you now want to probe into the kinds of things you're asking, you need something outside that framework. There's two parts I want to answer on this. So one is directly answering your question. How do you know if you're facilitating second order change with someone? And the other is, how do you even know that we're starting to see increased wisdom in society, which is related to second order work and how the system is becoming wiser over time. All right, so first let me answer the first question. And again, you have to reach for a lot of the work that I do in generative learning, because it's the generative learning that got applied to everything that is to why the mBraining methodology looks like how it does and why it doesn't look like just another version of NLP, right? Because it's all the generative learning aspects. And I had to answer this very question that you're asking. If I were actually facilitating generative change, generative transformational vertical change in someone, and I'm seeing a change in consciousness, how would I know? What would actually start to happen? And this is where I started to code that I started off over many years, started to find there were 6 domains I would actually see changes in to know that vertical change was starting to occur. Okay. So before I talk about the 6 domains, how would you know these 6 domains are changing? Well, one of the first things is you're going to see a change in language. You're going to see a change in the logical leveling of the language that they use. And one of the things you're going to see the first change in is what's called epistemology, their way of knowing. So their way of now making sense of the world is different. And you can calibrate based on the language they're using. It's of a higher order. They have language now, meta language. They have language about things, not just caught up in the content of things. You will see a change in ontology. You will see a shift in their way of being. Their whole demeanor will shift. How they carry themselves in the world will shift. How they know themselves to be will shift. And it will have increasing levels of requisite variety, meaning they can absorb more of the challenges more easily. You're going to see a change in what we were just talking about around emergent outcomes, a change in teleology, a change in where are they going? Like, what's their goal? What's their outcome? What's their sense of purpose? Where are they headed? What is it to be achieved? Right. Well, that will shift quite dramatically. You're going to see a change in their phenomenology, which is the way they experience the world. How things occur to them and arise in their consciousness will change. They might see more beauty in the world, or suddenly things get instantly reframed from their natural way of being. It's like what was a problem is now a golden opportunity. And it's not a positive phrase. They really mean it. Right? They really realize that now they're really grateful for before what to them was a problem. Right? It occurs to them very, very differently. Right? And you're also going to see a change in levels of meta and meta-meta consciousness.
All right. Now we're going deep.
Yeah, now we're going deep.
Okay.
So now you're going to start to see them having language about things. They'll even reflect on their own internal processes. And if the way they're reflecting isn't that supportive of their way of being, they'll challenge or question and inquire into their own way of reflecting on themselves, hence meta-meta. They'll question their own level of meta as to whether or not that's the most appropriate way to be reflecting on things. Right? And you just hear the sudden sophistication in their language now starting to appear. And I said the whole demeanor will start to shift. And when you see that you've got a trajectory now happening towards more vertical change or consciousness evolution starting to occur. Now, coming back to another second part, I see you got some questions running in your head already. But before I do that, let me answer the second part of your question, which is how do we know we've got even wisdom of decision making? Because this now relates to something you actually inquired about, which is first of all, I knew this was going to happen when we did a very early on, we did an mBIT seminar in Toronto. And I invited my NLP mentor, Wyatt Woodsmall, to that. And I've known Wyatt for decades, and I know how much he does some very perceptive, insightful, grueling mismatching on things. And we kept talking about an mBIT, around wisdom, and I had the evolution of wisdom on the mBIT roadmap. And I knew Wyatt was going to ask me about denominalizing wisdom, so I was ready. I was I was ready for this. So while we don't have a proper verb form of wisdom, we can't just say wising, but or wisdoming, but it makes no sense. So what is it? How do you know? What is the evidence of something being wise? So for something to be wise, it has to be systemic. You have to have a systemic viewpoint. You have to look at it from in terms of overall ecology, but you have to look at it in terms of ecological slash systemic behavior over time. So there is no way to know if something is wise or not in the moment. We don't know. We don't know how this is going to play out. We only need to see how it's going to play out. But even then, when we see how a decision or an action plays out over time, from what lens, what what filters are we using to evaluate this? Because we can't have infinite amount of filters. And then let's say it was, great. We saw how it played out over 10 years. Great. But what happens at 20 years? What happens at 100 years? So the short answer is we can never know whether something is or isn't categorically wise. But what we can know is that there's a probability that a behavior or a decision or a choice is wiser compared to if you hadn't taken into account these other perspectives or integrated your brains or come at it from a particular angle or whatever it might be. So the truth is, at the end, we don't know categorically, but we do know that some things will lend themselves to be wiser than less wise, or sometimes I might even go so far as to say stupid, which means jeopardize your own survival, right?
Yeah.
So,
And very quickly, something that's wise may not be wise.
yeah, that's correct. It could, from whose lens and in what time frame, right? Because it could look really wise for a while, but like I said, 100 years later, we find out we thought that was wise, and
Mm.
it looked great up until a century passed, and we find out it wasn't so wise anymore. Or from another angle, yeah, it looks wise unless you take the view or the perspective of this group or this person or whatever it might be, or this part of the ecology or whatever. And so you can never ultimately know. We don't have that omniscience.
Short-term wisdom, though, in an mBraining coaching session from week to week,
Mm,
I mean, you could even see potentially a change in whether something was wise to continue applying, in 10 weeks or 12 weeks or 52 weeks. I mean, the window of wisdom doesn't have to be centuries or
correct.
decades.
No.
It can be a smaller period of time.
Yeah. Now you're starting to see comes back to second order change and emergent properties, right? So second, uh, you, I'll answer your question first, and I'll explain it a bit more, so you got something to pull on, right? Which is, you're right. From week to week, in a coaching session, you're looking at the person's overall ecology, who they are and how they relate to life and all the other aspects that are important to life. And it's that whole ecosystem, their personal ecosystem, becoming healthier, more viable. It's more life affirming rather than life denying, and you're starting to see their congruency and authenticity expressing itself easier and easier, and they're getting more ease rather than struggle, more freedom rather than struggle. And so as you see that evolving, then it's moving in a proper direction, hence the vertical nature of it. Now, remember that. Now I'll come back and unpack that a little bit further, right? So second order change is an emergent property. You can't have a prescribed, or it would be very difficult. I can say you can't. It would be very difficult to have a well-formed second order goal that you're after in really nutted out in what you would see, hear, feel, smell, and taste. Because you're still looking at it from the state you're in. And over time, what's going to happen is for it to be second order, it has to emerge as the current system reorganizes and produces different qualities and different properties. And that's unpredictable from where we are now, from where we sit in the present state. So second order change is emergent. So when I work with large organizations, for instance, and their leadership teams in trying to facilitate and helping them to facilitate second order change in their cultural systems or whatever it might be, it's not an implementation. It's not like here's a goal and we implement. That's impossible for second order change. But what you can do is keep facilitating how the system is behaving through what I call systemic nudging, so that the culture keeps emerging in a more healthy direction. It keeps evolving in a proper direction that's more viable, more robust, more life-affirming, etc. And you can see that with an individual client. So when we use the term second order change, it's in NLP language, it's a comparative deletion. It's second order compared to what? Because if I go back another logical level, what you class as second order may not be from a higher order of thinking. But from within this level, it's totally second order. Right? So it's a descriptor that's relative from a perspective. And now keep in mind as well, a lot of second order change, real second order change, often is made up of an accumulation of a lot of first order changes. So first order change is not a bad thing. If that's all that's needed, that's far more efficient than trying to facilitate something that's transformational when transformation's not needed. But secondly, a lot of times you've got to do a lot of first order changes before you can actually have enough new connections ready to form where you can emerge a second order reorganization of the person's psychology. And so, sometimes as the coach, your client, you just may be taking your client through a series of first order changes for a while. But then by the time you get to the 8th, 9th, 10th session, now the real work can actually happen. But that was impossible without the previous sessions.
What are some examples of first order changes? I want to make sure that I know exactly what you mean about that.
Yeah, so, okay, first a technical description, then I'll give you some examples. So remembering that it's any change inside of a system. All right, so now you highlight another thing, Bill. I love your questions. All right, like I said earlier, we can finish this up in mid-2025 if you like, and then cut it short then. So, okay, understanding first categories of first order change. It was really important when I was working with, when I still am, working with leaders in large organizations, looking at complex systems, and having them develop a skill. It's an actual skill to identify first order changes, not only as it's happening, but also ideally before it happens. Right? So if someone's going to propose millions of dollars for a change initiative in this large corporate, you should be able to spot right away that, okay, at best, this is going to happen, but it's not really going to transform anything, right? And so over the years, I started to code. There are 4 major categories of first order change. So understanding these categories can lead us now to some examples, right? Now, the first one, believe it or not, is improvement. Improvement is a first order change. Now, and the reason why, before I explain a bit further, the reason why is because take the current system, the current culture, the current way of thinking, the current practices, whatever is going to be the system you're looking at. Improvement makes that system better. Still the same system, it's just better. Right? It's not a second order change, it's just a better system. Now, there are times when that's all that's needed. Nothing wrong with improvement. Nothing wrong with improvement. As long as the system, the culture, the way of thinking, the paradigm is appropriate. But when the culture, the system, the paradigm is the dysfunction, that's the problem. Improvement makes things worse.
Oh.
Why? Because as we know, as you would have, people listening would have heard around we talk a lot in the early stages of mBIT around cognitive dissonance. So we have a problem state. There's an ideal that we want. It's a real problem. Somebody do something about it. And so someone comes in with an improvement and the system improves. What happens? Cognitive dissonance lessens. And now we don't feel the need for big changes anymore because things are better.
Uh-huh.
But actually, the system itself is the problem. Suddenly, motivation is now lost to actually rework the system because why? Things are going okay now. And we've just bought ourselves another year or two. Right? But we're actually going to suffer for a year or two before you even consider looking at the whole system again. Right? So when the system is dysfunctional, improvement can be a problem. When it's not dysfunctional, but it actually works, improvement's all you need. It's great. But sometimes we need a series of improvements before the system is ready to be able to make a big change. Right? So that's one thing. All right, next one, related to the improvement, is the fix. The fix is things used to work. They're not working anymore. Somebody fix it. Fix the problem. This is the way most people approach, as you would know, Bill, this is the way most people approach health. They go to a doctor only when something is wrong. And in that problem state, all they want is the reverse of the problem. Somebody fix the problem. Right? Get me back to, it's called remedial change. Get me back, get rid of my pain or whatever it might be. And then once I can get back there, I'm good. Well, no, you're not, because the way you were at that time is what caused the symptoms.
Yeah.
Right?
You hear
Right.
that a lot with stroke recovery. People say, oh, I just wish things were like they were before.
Yeah, no, you don't. Right? Because the way you were before is how you got to the stroke in the first place. Exactly, right? So the fix, again, if the system works well, a fix is all you need. But other times when it's not and the system itself needs evolution, a fix reduces the cognitive dissonance, and again, we got a problem. The third, which is what most people will, the third type of first order change that most people will be aware of is much ado about nothing. Rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It's kind of like, great, corporates do this all the time. Millions of dollars spent on a change initiative, and after several years and millions of dollars spent, we are right back at status quo. Nothing's really changed.
That
Right?
change for the sake of change.
Change for the sake of change. But they don't know it, you see, because it looks good on paper. All the intentions are there for real change. But if you don't understand systems thinking, you don't understand how changes get neutralized by a living system, because a living system will want to go to homeostasis. It'll start adjusting itself to absorb the changes so we can come right back to status quo. So unless you understand this living system is self-organizing around what? And unless you can affect that, the system's just going to neutralize back. And this is part of what happens when you do good mBraining work, right? You're changing the core loops. So when someone's going, oh, I've got this problem, I got this problem. Okay, let's come back to the foundational sequence. Breathe. Come back to a state of consciousness where you have some sort of autonomic coherence. From this manner of being, connect to what's important to you from your heart intelligence. We've just changed the strange attractor. We've just changed what your whole psychology is revolving around. Don't revolve around the problem or fixing it. Revolve around what's important. Now the system starts rearranging. Right? The fourth one is changes that lock in the current system and make it even harder.
Oh.
Right? And very timely now in the US, and it'll be timely again for us about a year's time, which is the election cycles. Right? Great, we need some change. Great, let's just vote in the other party again, or we'll keep flip-flopping back and forth between a two-party system. And what makes you think that's going to change? I have a colleague in the US. He's very, very excited about the election coming up. And in his words, if this happens and, their particular candidate gets in, then there'll be big changes. And I think probably not. Right? Right. Probably not. I doubt it. There'll be surface changes, but at the end of the day, we're still going to have the political cycles and the things that we have, and Not a whole lot. It's going to actually be shifting in the larger system of things. Right? We see it in large corporates today with things like changes of CEOs. As long as the CEO keeps getting their primary reward is a massive remuneration package based on sales performance, not a lot's going to change. Right? And it's like, let's change. And then we'll just pay the new CEO more. It's just like, yeah, you've just locked in no change. Right? And so on it goes. All right. So coming back now to a range of things. So, when your client comes in and says, I have this real problem with, my partner really bugs me and I get so upset and, can you help me deal with this stress? Well, look, if the client has a very low degree of self-awareness, they have low metaconsciousness or metacognition about their own internal processes. You can't just propose to them, okay, you need some personal transformation and connect to your essential way of being. And, we're going to express some more. They're going, what the hell are you talking about? Right? So we might need some remedial fixes for right now. And we might do a remedial fix around just getting them to manage their stress levels. Just do that for the week. Come back next week. Right? Now, did that help things over the week? Yeah, I'm a lot calmer. It's like, awesome. It's kind of first order, but needed. Right? We need this because I can't go farther till you get a reference experience, a reference structure to pull on, to generalize from until we have that. Now, let me teach you some open-ended questioning techniques. So instead of you just hammering on your partner and arguing with them, some inquiry techniques to try and find out what their motives are, and try to diffuse the situation. It's still pretty first order, but needed, right? And things will get better. And it's not until they come back and kind of say, all right, I'm no longer in reaction to my partner, but now I'm starting to wonder, God, what else is there? Now we got something we could possibly work with. Right.
Mm-hmm. So that is the recognition of something different having occurred, which is positive, and that they have been able to achieve, facilitate in themselves, or do, and then as a result of that, they become more. Give me more of that. What else can I do?
Okay. So there's now two things. I feel like Pandora and her box, and you just keep opening up the lid on that.
You're welcome. I wasn't going to make this easy for you, Marvin.
Thank you, Bill. All right. First, let's take a look at some key first principles. So as you know, Bill, I always, for things to go generative, because that's kind of the land I live in,
Mm-hmm.
I have to go up to first principles or organizing principles from which to work from, right? Because if it's a true first principle, you can't violate them. They're always going to be in play, right? Now, one's articulation of a first principle could be off, but nonetheless, until it's proven that case, you're going to work to it up to a point, right? So one of these is this. If you look at, in classic NLP, for instance, if you take a look at the meta model, the meta model is based on a set of really critical principles about how we create our maps of the territory through language. And for those that know, and if someone doesn't know, then a very rapid explanation that does great injustice to the idea, but nonetheless, I'll go for it for now, which is we go through life. We go through life experiencing things through our senses. We see, hear, feel, smell, tasting. We have concrete experience. And as the meta model points out, or the first principles of the meta model points out, we're not a tabula rasa. We're not a free, clear space when we experience things. We're bringing to it already our memories, our conditioning, and the very fact that we're experiencing the world through our senses instantly means we're not experiencing everything, right? We can only experience what our central nervous system can take in, right? At the moment, as far as we know, for the majority of people on the planet, there might be a rare person out there, but for most part, our eyes do not see the spectrum of wavelengths having to do with, say, ultraviolet or infrared, but it's there. But since we don't see it, or it doesn't come into consciousness, we can't cognize it, we don't experience it, and it doesn't play part of our internal representations of things. But once we have that, as we say in meta model, reference structure, we have a reference to pull on now, we've experienced something, we create a deep structure that has now been generalized, deleted, and distorted. We create a representation of it. And that goes on for a while until we finally say a surface structure, we say something, and it's now grossly generalized, deleted, and distorted. So unlike NLP, where we're going to try and meta model this and etc., which is all a good thing, but the first principles to understand is, as humans, we are model-making creatures. We are meaning-making, therefore model-making creatures. We are generalizing, deleting, and distorting things. But we cannot generalize and delete and distort anything that we've never experienced. So if someone's never experienced, for instance, conscious control of their autonomic nervous system to reduce stress, I can't tell them, just breathe and reduce your stress. That's a surface structure they have no deep structure for, right? But if I can coach them through that, then help them go through 1 week, say I'm meeting with them weekly, 1 week of practicing, that's 1 week of reference structures. That when they come back, we now have a base to generalize from into a useful direction, right? If you can do that, we can now do this, right? But you have to help them create reference structures from which to generalize from. Now, very similarly, come back to the second component I want to talk about with your thing, which is ways of being. If you just go up to someone and kind of go, connect to your inner authentic self, they don't know what the hell you're talking about, right? And inner authentic self is not one thing. That's a giant nominalization. What is this ongoing process of authentically denominalizing I and who I am? And you have to give them some reference experiences of that through the coaching. That'll be beyond language. They'll have to put narratives on top of their experiences. But when you start helping them now get experience after experience after experience and connecting it up with a conscious mode of processing, that way of being and knowing yourself in those kinds of ways, with those reference structures, now we can generalize into much higher order things. And this is why someone who's been doing mBIT, say, for a year, will do the highest expressions very differently than someone who just got exposed to it.
Yeah.
And so part of your job is you have to know that. You have to know well, you don't have to, but it's saying, if you want to facilitate real vertical change, this is what you're doing. You're not just getting them to align their 3 adaptive neural networks. That's just straight behavioral. I mean, that's powerful unto itself. There's no question. But that wasn't the goal. That wasn't the teleology that was built into mBraining. It was about raising of consciousness. For that, there's a whole other set of underlying a strata that needs to be put in place to facilitate a good mBIT session. Or I should say a vertical change mBIT session. You can still do a behavioral one and it's still good. So.
Yeah. One of the things that came up is, this just might show you how my brain works, is that you said, when you said you can't just tell them to connect to their authentic selves, their authentic self might not be nice. It might be a nasty one, right?
Depends what you mean by authentic self.
Yeah.
Depends what your definition and what your philosophy particularly is. So there is, and you raise an important point for if mBIT coaches don't know this, there is a built-in underlying philosophy underneath that's hidden in it. It's hidden because we never fully expressed it explicitly, but it is there. There's a great story where with INLTA, with the International NLP Trainers Association. The very first trainers training we did in Munich back in early 90s. The There were three board of directors. There was myself, Wyatt Woodsmall, and Bert Feustel in Germany. And Wyatt and I designed the curriculum first, right, for the trainers training. And then when we got to Munich, we were showing Bert the curriculum. And of course, in the curriculum, we jotted our own notes back to ourselves and a whole range of things. And Bert quickly, he's Mr. AD, Mr. Auditory Digital, super logical head brain guy. And he's a member of Mensa. He's like, and he goes through the curriculum really quickly, and he sees and he spots this one thing, and he says, "What is this covert spirituality?" I don't know why I cracked up. And I went, funny you found that. So, yeah, there is a set of spiritual frameworks built into mBIT as well. There's a covert spirituality that's actually in there, and it does work from some frameworks that where the premise that we're coming from, and we're not saying this is true. We're just saying from where we came from when we put it together, we're coming from the place that an essential self is essential. It is in essence as part of, for lack of better terms, universal consciousness. If you want to use the words God consciousness, there's something there that is a fractal thereof, and therefore we are as above, so below, as the old principle goes. And it's there, and it's trying to express itself as part of the creation of the world or creation of the universe. And so for us, yeah, an authentic essential self is not bad. It is intrinsically, inherently good. It is intrinsically from a spiritual universal consciousness expressing itself into the world in your unique particular set of vibrations. And so this is why we unabashedly just go, if you can just connect to that, stuff will start to change for the better. And we start to find, as you would have found as well, it's pretty much the case. Now, having said that, we've only been working with, for lack of better terms, people that are not bona fide psychopaths, that are not some incarnate demon. Like we haven't worked with any of those people, so I can't categorically say every human is this way, but for the ones we're going to probably work with on a commercial basis, the odds are pretty likely. Unless you work in the criminal system where you are dealing with a psychopath every now and then. I don't know if you're going to do mBraining. In fact, I would highly recommend not, because once they see what you're doing, they will use it against you. So,
Yeah.
but other than that,
So the model didn't involve modeling psychopaths.
psychopaths or people deemed as purely evil or anything of
Yeah.
that nature.
Yeah. I think it's really important to note that. I know it should be obvious perhaps, but I think it's still important to kind of
Mm,
understand like how it was developed at that level and who might have been excluded
mm,
in that development of it. And I think that's really important because I'm not sure, would NLP have gone through that kind of understanding or that level of kind of um I don't even know what the word is, but because I don't understand about how much about how NLP developed, but it seems like there isn't anything built into NLP kind of to avoid somebody like that accessing the the methodology and then using it for the wrong reasons. Like it just seems like there's more likely for somebody, to NLP you into a bad state or
mm.
NLP you into with an embedded command into doing something that you don't want to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, two parts to that. Well, so one is, yeah, as we all are pretty much aware of in the world, there are people using NLP to, you know, bad intent, for lack of better terms. And
Yeah.
again, it's not a categorical bad. It's just from my framework.
Mm.
I look at it and kind of go, whoa, Oh, that doesn't look good, right? But it obviously makes sense to them in their model of the world, but doesn't mean I have to agree with it, right? So the there are people that are doing that. They did do a lot of modeling. Remember, just a quick potted history, just since you asked, but the NLP originated by looking at master therapists to begin with, right? It sort of began, it was a combination of starting points. There's no real definitive, like singular trajectory. Many things happened all at once. So as the rumor goes, Grinder was teaching his version of the meta model at the University of California, Santa Cruz campus. He had students coming through there like Bandler, Dilts, um, Gilligan, quite a few others. They band together. Bandler was also a mathematician, computer programmer. When back then that was about filling out, punch cards. But he was also a Gestalt therapist, and they were all kind of living together, all in one place. There was Frank Puslik as well. Frank Puslik was also a Gestalt therapist, and so that's where they started to apply a lot of things. And they remember they're in Santa Cruz, right? They're in Esalen, and so they got access to people like Fritz Perls had already passed when they started doing this, but they had access to Virginia Satir. They got access to Milton Erickson. And so they were looking at master therapists who could produce change in other people, profound change in other people. And that's where a lot of the methodologies first started to arise, or a lot of NLP started to get coded. And Frank Puslik and Bandler would practice a lot of it in their study groups. Um, and so that's where the one lens to look at the storyline of how it started to particularly unfold. Over time, as Erickson went and did a lot of things with clinically, not insane, but clinically crazy people. And rumor has it, mythology has it. I have no way to fact check to this, but apparently the rumor and mythology has it is that Bandler did that as well. Bandler went and tried out a few things at different institutions to see how it would work. So they did things with the crazies, so to speak. Lots of things with schizophrenia studies or stories, I should say, about the origins of NLP. But I don't know about full-blown psychopaths,
Uh-huh.
criminal killers, anything of that nature. I haven't heard any stories about that.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, there is a guy, or was a guy, named Neville Yeoman. Neville was Australian, and he created an approach called community therapy up in Queensland, and actually Sydney and Queensland. And he studied NLP. Margaret Mead came to actually study what he was doing because she said his stuff was the best of its kind in the world. And he did work with criminals that were mad, bad, crazy killers, rapists, things of that nature. And he was able to do profound Ericksonian-like changes, but from a different angle, not hypnosis, but through community therapy. So who knows?
Yeah. It's it's interesting to hear. It's interesting to hear that. And I'm not sure what to make of it, but that's okay. I mean, I'm not trying to make anything of. I'm just trying to, kind of gather information and understand things for my own
Mm.
sake. The things that my head sort of asks me, and then I kind of that's kind of why I went down that tangent. But to come back to come back to mBraining, um, and the foundational sequence.
Mm.
So I understand, and I've taught in the coach certifications that I ran years ago, and during coaching, I've understood. It's great to start with the heart, um, access the heart, go to the head, come to the heart, go to the gut, come to the heart, and so on, and run the foundational sequence from the heart. But every once in a while, I I'm not sure if it's instinct or what, but something says to me, don't start with the heart
Mm.
and run the foundational sequence from either the gut or the head.
Mm.
And it often then creates a different conversation. Like it facilitates a different, it facilitates, some kind of a amazing, a possibility of another amazing session, but it's a completely
Correct.
different experience. So is it okay to begin the foundational sequence elsewhere? And under what conditions might it be appropriate to do that?
Okay. Before I answer that, there's actually some clear answers to your question. Let me ask a meta question. Why why are you asking that?
Okay, good
Because
question.
trying to find out what would have to be there so you would have to ask that question.
It seems restrictive
Mm,
to have to start with the heart all the time.
mm.
To me, it feels like, in my coaching practice, it feels like it feels like I'm so if the heart intelligence is 33% of the intelligences that I'm going to be accessing, if it feels like I'm missing out on the opportunity to mix it up a little bit and access the other 66% of the intelligences, and
In a different sequence.
and then just change it up so that I can have more ways to get an outcome for a client.
Mm,
That's
okay.
why I'm asking.
All right. So the short answer to your question is yes. It's um, you can start anywhere, right? You don't have to start with the heart. Is the short thing. Now, the a bit longer thing to explain a lot of this. So the foundational sequence was never meant to be the only sequence, right? So I think it's the fifth neural integrative constraint, which is wrong. The brains are they are communicating to each other, but in the wrong sequence. Wrong sequence compared to what? Compared to outcome and compared to the level of consciousness of the person. So many times, the foundational sequence works well if, big if here, right? If the person has already a reasonable degree of facility within themselves to access the different neural networks, they have a sufficient degree of metacognition to pay attention to their own internal processing, and they're already not necessarily fighting with themselves. It works easier that way, right? Now, if someone, let's say, is very in NLP language, very AD, very auditory digital, very dissociated from their body. And if anyone also listening knows about the Enneagram, they might have a fixation around an extreme Enneagram 3 fixation point. Good luck starting with the heart. It's going to be close to impossible. And so you're going to, again, you have to not only build the reference structures, but as you know, Bill, you're just going to have to build the actual neurological structure for them to gain access. If they've been disengaged from their heart intelligence for decades, they might not have enough neural connections going on for them to actually access the heart intelligence at that point.
Literally.
Literally, yeah, literally, structurally, right? So you will have to start with where they're at, their head, say their head. But if their head is problematic in their storytelling, you're going to have to figure out a pattern interrupt to be able to do something here. Okay. Now, if someone has extreme Crohn's disease, for instance, or something, celiac disease, or whatever it might be, right? It's like, yeah, good luck trying to get the gut intelligence to come on board anytime in the sequence.
Uh-huh.
All right. We're going to have to do some other stuff first to get this to work. Now, the other thing is if they lack a lot of metaconsciousness, if they lack body awareness, etc., good luck starting with the heart or the gut. Close to impossible. If they do have a lot of meta awareness on certain things, let's say you've got someone who's, say, on the Myers-Briggs scale, a bit more of a feeler function than a thinker function, right? and they have and they have a degree of metacognition where they're pretty good at looking at their values-based logic, their values-based perceiving and processing of things, right? You can get them to start with their heart a bit more. If you got someone that is very strong into their body sensations and they have a lot of self-awareness of their kinesthetics, you could start with the gut as a beginning point. So you don't have to do the foundational sequence in exactly the way it is. You don't even have to do all three sometimes, right? If somebody is a high intuitor and really quick in their thinking, their high NT, intuitive thinking, sometimes just getting them clear on their heart and gut intelligence is enough. The head takes care of the rest. The head goes, I got it. Ah, okay. Right.
Uh-huh.
Right. And then at other times, based on the issue itself, based on the issue itself. So, for give an example, about what, 2 days ago, I was trying to wrestle with something that had to do with I could recognize in my through my head function that this needs an upgrade of identity for me, right? My own identity needed upgrading along this particular thing. And it was like, okay, great. Now, but what specifically does it need upgrading on? And I really had to kind of check in at meta levels, quickly checking in heart, gut, but trying to come up with a head-based map so I knew what I needed to do to facilitate myself, right? Now, I had to do a good chunk of that work through my head brain first. I can't just go to my gut and go, hey, gut, what identity upgrade do I need? It doesn't know.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't know. The gut's the good soldier. It's like it's waiting for some kind of direction. Now, I didn't have to check in with my heart as to whether or not it was important for me to do this. I know it's important. I just need a map of what am I trying to do. I just need some set of heuristics to figure out how I'm going to go about this and try and piece together where am I entering, from the heart or the gut or whatever it might be. And then I was tracking, do I need to check in with my heart about what's important? I went, no, I know. I've got the general feeling that this is important. That's enough. I now needed to talk to my gut about the identity upgrade, get my gut going, yeah, let's do this. Then I could talk to my heart and go, okay, heart, what's important? Like identity upgrade into what direction? Like what values am I trying to fulfill here? Right.
Yeah.
So it's really tailored to the outcome and the state of consciousness for that person and the task at hand.
It's good to hear your answer because even though that's definitely what I've done before,
Mm.
it just seemed like I was going against the rules or something.
Orthodoxy, yeah, you see,
Yeah.
and it should never have been. It should never have been that. It should never have been, that there's dogma or there's orthodoxy in play. That instead it was about first principles, and it's kind of like, this is what it is, and this is why, we were saying at the very beginning that the collection of mBIT, the collection of multiple brain integration techniques, should be ever expanding, and everybody who's ever learned it should be expanding that toolkit. Everybody should be coming up with new methods, new techniques, new whatevers. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate our conversation, Marvin.
So if I didn't go too far off tangent on a range of things that I can do, but and
No, I
we've
don't think so. I think it was a pretty good conversation. It was comprehensive. I mean, I got from it what I needed to
oh, good,
understand
yeah.
and kind of grow. That's going to help me grow my practice. It's going to help me with developing my use of mBraining personally as well. So, and there are times where I forget to access my skills when necessary. In life when things sometimes overwhelm. And I think for me, what this is good is just a good reminder of what kind of a tool we have access to, what kind of a tool this is, and how much and how deep and broad it is, and how much effort was put into it, and what thoughts and processes were put into it, so that I can remind myself to default to it, or
Mm.
or at least go to it, if not my default tool, but go to it more regularly, because I'm no different to anybody else. I've learned something, and sometimes I shelve it, and then I forget to go back to it, and then
Mm.
when I go back to it, then I start to benefit from it again. Uh, like I remember benefiting from it when I first started
Mm.
my training.
Yeah, perhaps it might be helpful to also not think of it as an it,
Uh-huh.
right? So it's not whether you go back to it or not, or
Yeah.
use it, but rather it is a suite of tools. It's a framework. What's more important though are, like I said earlier, are the first principles embedded within it. Because whenever you're working with someone or working with yourself, the first principles are still in play. Yeah. And so as long as you're trying to fulfill the first principles, then you're now going to be faced with a how. How do I do that? And the how is like, oh yeah, there are mBIT tools and there are NLP tools and there are other tools. There's other methodologies out there as well.
Yeah.
But you're still trying to facilitate the same thing, or in this particular context, because I'm coming at it from a generative learning framework, it's still about trying to evolve consciousness for wiser decision making in society. And if we get people more connected to an essential self, an authentic way of being, where there's natural expression, there will be an increased propensity for wiser decisions and actions in the world. And so this is what we're about. So how do we go that? Sometimes it's about aligning their neural networks. Sometimes it's straight out meta modeling of their narratives and internal dialogue. Sometimes it's, maybe we're going to do some Peter Levine PTSD somatic work, whatever it might be, whatever. But I'm still trying to get to the same goal, the same teleology.
Yeah. Thanks so much once again, Marvin. I really appreciate
Pleasure. And we finished early. It's still 2024.
it. We can have another conversation one day if you like. If you really want to extend it into that, we can definitely do that.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Bill. Have a good one. Take care.
Thank you for watching this conversation. If you found it valuable, please consider sharing it with others who may benefit. And remember, you can join Marvin's Professional Change Agents Network mailing list at behavioralmodeling.com.